Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles to the Angelo Robles podcast. I'm also the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. Today, our session, I'm going to give you a title and a subtitle. How will entrepreneurship and early stage investing look in our new decentralized world? The subtitle, what are the big trends that will affect how businesses are built in the future? If you're an investor, a family office, and if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you're younger, kind of that millennial or Generation Z in high school or in college, we're entering into a new world. What you're learning in college, much of it, unfortunately, especially now in COVID, where you're not even getting the social interaction, may not be as applicable as it's been in the past. And it's going to be in a really exciting world moving forward with, I think, a lot of opportunities. So let's be optimistic. But you do have to have the right mindset, to some degree, skills, and be prepared. And this applies if you're going to be an investor as well. So our special guest today, we're very fortunate to have on, is Victor Hwang. Victor, it's a pleasure to see you. Right before we get into it, I do want to give a little bit of context to you and what you're doing. You're an economic growth expert. Your ideas have shaped the economic lives of millions of people worldwide. You have helped over 300 communities, cities, states, companies, and entire countries, how about that, in creating greater economic prosperity. He is, meaning Victor, the founder and CEO of Right to Start, a campaign fighting to rebuild the economy by making entrepreneurship opportunities available to all. Previously, he was vice president of entrepreneurship at the Kauffman Foundation, which I think everyone in my audience should know or better know, the world's leading philanthropic organization supporting entrepreneurs with an endowment of, only about $2 billion. He is a serial entrepreneur as well, so he's walked the walk, not just from an educational perspective, started 2 major conferences, wrote a gold medal winning book of the year, and delivered one of the best commencement speeches ever. And not just for my opinion, but according to National Public Radio. Now, Victor, after that long buildup, you better live up to it. Victor, how are you?
Very good, Angelo. Thanks so much for having me here.
Let's get right to it. What are the macro trends? Like I asked in my subtitle, what are the macro trends that will affect how businesses are built in the future?
Well, if you really look across like the whole landscape of technological trends, financial trends, social trends, political trends, what we're seeing is a decentralization of power, that the institutions, the people, the incumbents that have had power before are being challenged in new ways. And we've seen this emerge in things like such as media. That's very well known, where a lot of the traditional media firms have been challenged by different sources of news. But we're just seeing the beginning of that. Now you think about that same kind of decentralization applied across all sorts of institutions, from the ability to create value, for people to start businesses, for people to become makers of whether digital or hard goods, the tools for capital raising, the tools for how you actually design a society and economy are all moving in that direction. So it's going to be a really fascinating, dynamic time for all of us to watch this.
I mean, this appears to be, to some degree, a shift of power from institutions and larger organizations to individuals. The days of yore, where you graduated college, you got a traditional job, you made a career out of it, or maybe even changed positions, God forbid, every 7 or 10 years, that appears to be incredibly antiquated. And when I talk to people in college and young adults, the idea of working for one company for anything close to, forget a lifetime, 7 or 10 years seems, with rare exceptions, not what they really want, not what it's in their heart. And I'm not even sure they believe there's going to be opportunities like that to grow moving forward. So many of them are looking to what the new world order looks like for them and how they can have more control over their brand, their opportunity, and how they're going to make money and make a living. And how do you think that plays into it, the shift of power from larger organizations to individuals?
Well, if you look at the arc, for instance, of just this very country, and this country was built off of entrepreneurs, creators, artisans, makers. These are individuals largely that were craftspeople, and they had their own ability to create and make and create control their own economic lives. Now, clearly, there were a lot of people left out. There were people that were African Americans, Native Americans were left out of that conversation in many ways. But the vision of the country was that individuals would have that power. And then we went through this era of industrialization over the past century and a half, which ended up taking power to create institutions that were more powerful than individuals. That is now shifting back in the other direction. And for instance, like in these devices, we all carry these devices in our pockets or around with us. An individual, a kid today, an adult, has more power at their fingertips on these devices than any human being ever had in the history of the world. If you think about that, like they have the ability to conceive of an idea, to design a product, to have a supply chain built up for that product, to build up manufacturing and distribution and marketing, all from their cell phone. But if you think about that, we actually have that power, but who really knows how to exploit that power? So we're actually at this moment where we have to think about how do we actually change the systems that actually give people that real power?
Yeah, that's a very good perspective. I'll go back a little bit, and I know I get pounded in social media for being kind of anti-school, and I'm definitely not. I think there's tremendous value in education. There's many great educators out there. The opportunity of getting away from your parents, going to college, developing independence, a little more challenged during COVID, but appears to be getting better. And having a sense of history and base understanding in entrepreneurship, business, and finance, I don't discount that at all. But I do question the value in today's world when it's built on, like you said, the prior industrial revolution of education based on learning through memorization, when I could simply, I'm afraid to say it because my phone may go off, but like, hey, Siri, and then boom, I'm looking at it now. It didn't pop up, thank God. I could get the answer to practically anything I want in seconds. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to get value from memorization, but there may be more value in being a communicator, emotional intelligence, and being creative. And that's going to be where some of the opportunities lie for younger people. Don't you agree, moving forward?
Absolutely. Well, if you think about it, like what is the future needing that AI and computing can't do? Creative problem solving. Computers have a really hard time with envisioning a future that doesn't exist. Computers are good at looking at patterns and replicating patterns, but human beings have the ability to conceptualize the future. And that's unique amongst all creatures on Earth, is to conceive of a future that doesn't exist and to marshal all the resources, the other people, the tools, the assets you need to actually build that future. And so that's a power. But if you think about that from an educational standpoint, we teach kids to take tests. We teach them to try to guess the answer to something that's been predetermined. But the world now is heading to a place where the answers are not going to be predetermined. People have to solve problems where it's essentially an open choice, everything's an open essay answer, even the things that seem like they had very clear answers before. I mean, this pandemic's a great example of that. Even the best experts had a hard time wrapping their heads around how do you actually manage and deal with this kind of situation, because there weren't obvious answers for everybody. And so that's going to be where we're headed, which is how do we teach kids to do that? And that's starting to emerge now as a phenomenon in education. And I've seen that in K through 12, as well as higher ed and community colleges, but it's still a fringe activity. By and large, the educational system is still built off the industrial era around testing people, helping them take jobs, not make jobs, helping them guess answers instead of create solutions. And that's going to be a massive shift that's coming, because people are going to demand it. The economy is going to demand it, and parents are going to demand it. And the kids get it. I mean, the kids already get it. We're not fooling anybody right now.
I mean, you brought up a whole bunch of things I'm going to probably ask a series of questions on. And yeah, deep tech, AI, and all that is great, and you better understand it. And it is changing the world in the future of jobs. Let's be honest, there's no doubt about that. And maybe COVID has pushed that along even quicker with advancements in technology and our greater fluidity, especially for those a little bit older in technology. More of it being more and more intuitive and easier to use. So we should be more active in it. But there are certain things, like you said, nothing yet could tell me how an apple tastes. That's a human thing, what love is. So there's definitely areas of human communication, philosophy, I would argue, and things like that, that are very centric to us as human beings, that there still is value in it. Now, a question I would ask, and I've answered this in my own way, if you're not learning all you need to know as a younger person moving forward in today's world, even at a great college, how do you self-educate yourself about some of these subjects? And I do think it's on the responsibility of that young person to do that. I would argue YouTube is incredible. There's lots of opportunities for you to be more familiar with the digital asset ecosystem and many of the things occurring in a DeFi and decentralized world moving forward, but you need to take the initiative. It is going to get easier. More and more colleges are going to teach it. I get it, but that's not going to change in the next week or even year. How do you become better self-educated on these subjects?
Well, the tools are all out there. I mean, if you listen to, if there's a student, who's dealing with math or chemistry or anything, you can actually find, I don't know how many people actually, go through and actually look for these types of subjects, but you can go and find almost any subject, and you can find the best teachers in the world teaching you how to think about that subject, taking you step by step through it. And a lot of those resources are now free. And so
Or
every
near
individual
free,
has
like
that
even on
power.
Udemy and all that, or like masterclass or something like that.
That's right. There's so many resources out there for self-learning. But you think about that. Well, then why do we have educational institutions that work the way they do? Why is school held from, 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock? Why are colleges only 4 years? These things don't need to exist? What we really should be thinking about is ubiquitous lifelong learning. And so for instance, like, why isn't a college set up as a lifelong membership service, right? When you don't just go to an elite college, you actually become a member for life, and you can pay a membership fee to have continuous access to all that learning for the rest of your life. And then you think about what that means in terms of, well, why do people just educate certain age groups? Why don't they start opening it up to everybody and provide that kind of lifelong learning? So I think if you think about what the change that can happen to educational systems when you start teaching people how to think for themselves, it really opens up the possibilities, and it creates lots of business opportunities as well. If you think about that, right? The ability for people to get access to the information they need anytime for the rest of their lives to teach them how to do stuff really creates tremendous opportunities for both the consumers and the creators of that.
Yeah, it's funny that you used the verbiage think for yourself. Two of my more popular YouTube videos, me and Adam Robinson, who's an incredible creative thinker and wonderful thought leader, and Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy, that was mainly a Bitcoin conversation, but went a lot deeper. And what he learned at MIT, if he really had to summarize it, he said it in my interview: learn how to think for yourself. So that is a great phrase. What you mentioned relative to colleges, what they have that employers in the past, and to a large degree still do, want is that diploma, that degree. And that's what they hold you to the standard for hundreds of thousands of dollars, often over 4 years. And again, I'm not discounting that. It is incredibly valuable. But there will be a point, and Google and other companies are already doing this, where that degree is going to be less valuable. It might even be more impressive if you're self-educated. And what have you learned? And like what Michael Saylor spoke about is, for him, and maybe he's incredibly brilliant, things move too slowly. And if he could hear the same professors, and one of his professors at MIT now has effectively a free YouTube channel where he could speed up the video because he's smart like that and could push it along and learn in a more condensed time. So I think this comes down to kind of stop making excuses. There's resources out there. Learn to think for yourself, become self-educated. And I think less and less employers are going to look at the value of that degree versus maybe having a certificate or being self-educated.
Totally. Well, if you think about, there's a uniquely American question that happens in conversation. It happens when you meet someone new in a party, or you meet someone new in a social setting. The question is, what do you do? And if you go to other parts of the world, they don't really ask that question as much. It's often like, where are you from, right? Or, tell us about your family or something like that. In America, it's, what do you do? What's the value you can create right now? What's the activity you're engaged in? And we're seeing this movement now amongst schools. For instance, there's a network, there's a school district in Kansas City that's spinning out an organization that's going to be a network of over 60 schools across the country that are actually redesigning education to focus on applied real world entrepreneurial skills. And that means they're solving, in solving things in essentially these types of environments where they're doing design thinking, project-based learning. They're having to work from scratch to build and solve problems that no one solved before. And they're starting to teach this all the way into elementary school. In fact, I lived in Silicon Valley for almost a decade, and there the kindergartners start doing design thinking, looking for prototyping solutions to community problems starting in kindergarten. And that model now is spreading everywhere. People are starting to think like, how do you get kids to start thinking like that, to think like entrepreneurs from the very beginning? You don't even have to call it entrepreneurship. It's just problem solving in the real modern context.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, and I'm glad to see there are some K through 12s that are being, creative, like Montessori and others, relative from that perspective. But at the end of the day, it still is going to be on you, the student, to not make excuses, just to move forward, because there are many free resources out there. When you mentioned before about a country built on creatives and doing things, there is a variation where they could monetize that now, besides the opportunity of reaching a global audience through social media, often for free. But yeah, some money and resources could help with that. You could then uptick that to something like a Patreon, and you could be a creative in music or poetry or something where you could capitalize on a global audience paying a minimal amount monthly, that could really add up to be real money. And that includes even building up a YouTube platform and others. And I'm not saying any of that is easy. It's not. But there is opportunity for creatives that are hustling with a little bit of luck and putting the right things together that could monetize their creativity, their thinking, etc. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. Well, there's this old saying that you just need 1,000 fans. And
Oh,
if
you were
if
actually
you've
going to
got,
get to that.
yeah,
Kevin Kelly, I believe.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so you can actually, if you think about the economy as it's been, you had to go through established distribution channels, you had to go through established marketing channels, and you had to have people essentially give you permission to be able to create your own value, to reach your own customers, and to sell your own value. But now you can go online, and these tools are now widely available, where people can actually reach. If you have 1,000 people that love what you do, and you can convince each of them to give you $100, that's $100,000. Suddenly, you can live a life by doing what you love if you can just find 1,000 people to give you $100 for it. And so for musicians, for creatives, for writers, and you're seeing this massive explosion. For writers, Substack has just in the last year has just
Yeah, it's
exploded.
great.
Yeah, same idea. It's the same idea like Patreon, but in a writing context, right? You're seeing this kind of thing happen in everywhere. I'm a Patreon subscriber to some artists I love, and Substack subscriber because certain writers that just write better than anything else you can get from a major publication. And so, in fact, a lot of the great writers from major publications are all going independent now because they're finding they can make more money and get a better audience on Substack than they ever could on a major platform.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And that's a great idea for people, and hopefully they're getting value out of that. And I know I'm jumping around all over the place, but that's kind of typical of me. So what else is new? But blurring the lines, as you also write about, between analog and digital. And there's nothing wrong with a foundation of analog, and there's a little bit of charm to sometimes see, feel, and touching something. We're going to get a little bit into NFTs and stuff like that in 1 second. But you're kidding yourself. You're kidding yourself if you think we're going to stay in an analog world. Things are moving in digitally incredibly quickly. There'll be blurred lines between analog and digital. But if you're going to be stuck in how things used to be, imagine when we have central bank digital currencies, more activity in crypto and wallets, programmable money, and you're stuck not knowing how to do that. I don't care how much money you have, that's not going to give you an advantage. And people might even start to take advantage of you. You're going to be at risk. What happens with longevity and increases in health and wellness, where you may live to be 110, 120? Don't think that because you're 60 or 70 that, oh, whatever, I got 10 or 20 more years left. That very well may not be true. And then you're going to be living in a completely digital world, and you're going to be unprepared. So using your age as an excuse is unacceptable. You could also be an entrepreneur at any age. What do you think about some of that, Victor?
Oh, I totally agree. I think the ability to well, if you think about anyone that carries a phone now is essentially a cyborg, right? You're sort of part
I'm going
digital
to
now.
steal that one.
Yeah, you're constantly connected. You walk into you walk down the street and people are staring at their phones, right? We are now connected cybernetically. We've already blurred the lines. We just think we're still in control. But if you think about it, we're actually not fully in control anymore in a pure analog sense. We're already blurred that lines that we live a lot of our lives through these digital tools. And so that's just going to increase because to the extent that it adds value to our lives, I think that we want that, right? We want to be able to access people and information faster when we need it. It's just the human urge to know. And that's going to continue. Now, one thing that's going to happen is you're going to find people taking back control. So right now, the devices, a lot of them are geared towards actually owning us instead of us owning them. And I think we're going to be shifting back to that just because people are going to demand it. And people are starting to demand it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you said earlier. I was going to bring it up, so we are going to jump around. The legendary Kevin Kelly, I believe formerly of Wired, has been an amazing futurist. And he's been on Tim Ferriss and others and has spoken about this. You know, you only need 1,000 fans. And I would argue you may only need 100. And you gave an example of working backwards. If you want to make a six-figure living as a creative, what you would need to have 1,000 fans, they pay a modest amount. Now, yeah, that number goes up. If you only need 100, you need them to commit more from a financial perspective, but these are reasonable numbers. So let's jump a little bit into non-fungible tokens, NFTs. Boy, talking about jumping all over the place. This is now an example where someone who's a creative from a musical perspective could effectively utilize something like NFTs and the creativity of doing custom work and numbering and a variety of factors where, again, are they going to become maybe an entrepreneur with millions and millions of annual revenue? Well, theoretically, yes, but let's assume that's a little unrealistic. They could still make a decent living and have the freedom of living anywhere they want and the freedom of their own life. And I think make a good enough living from the creative side by understanding NFTs and being active from that perspective.
I think the rise of NFTs is so interesting because right now it's being applied towards collectibles. So you think about like unique things like works of art or digital art that can't be replicated in its sort of true original form. Now people can replicate it digitally, but who owns that original asset has been the purpose of NFTs so far. But if you think about that, what if that technology was applied towards other things? So what NFT does is it basically tracks the original ownership of a digital asset. But now you start thinking about what about business creation or all forms of economic value creation? Could you design those types of blockchain enabled tools that allow you to actually start businesses? And if you think about that, like how many people actually add value to a business getting born? There's actually far more people than the stockholders. You have all the people that gave you a referral, opened a door, became an early customer, people that took a chance on you, people that helped you out along the way. What if you could design systems now where all those people actually become owners, partial owners of that thing, and not only just stock owners, they can actually have a piece of that revenue in the future. So you could start owning like tiny fractional shares of businesses. An individual who helps out lots of entrepreneurs could end up owning fractional shares of 1,000 businesses where they start seeing revenue streams come in for the rest of their lives that become tracked on the blockchain. So that kind of movement around entrepreneurial value creation, NFT is just the very beginning. I think the thing to get some people will get lost on is, well, NFTs as they're being used right now. But if you think about what does that technology mean for all forms of economic value creation, the future is huge. And I think we're just getting started on that. And right now we sign contracts, you have to negotiate stock ownership. What if you could snap your fingers and suddenly everybody who contributes to the life of a new product getting born or a new business getting born becomes a partial owner of that blockchain for the future of value of that business? It changes everything.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to jump into some of these more advanced and digital asset technologies right now, but I think the average person listening, although we kind of just hinted at it, doesn't even realize it's not just you buying NFTs from an investing or your own personal value. You could create an NFT, and it's actually not that hard. Am I correct? Is like Rarible and some other sources you could go to. In theory, anyone could do something. And what is it worth if you do it? You're like, oh, come on, it can't be worth anything. It's worth whatever someone's willing to pay for it. So I could create an NFT of digital art and I could charge $10,000 for it. Is it worth 10,000? If one person is willing to pay 10,000, well, then I guess it is. So this goes on to things like greater fool's theory and other things with irrational exuberance, which we're not going to get into psychology in today's podcast, but this all matters. So this also reminds me in today's digital world of blockchain. And that is something that colleges are starting to teach. I recommend it. This is going to be, it's an amazing advancement that started in 2008 and 2009. I think many people don't realize they could go to something like Unstoppable Domains and basically get let's use the word URL. So like my name, for instance, which of course I already have, is angelorobles.crypto. I pay whatever it was, $40. I don't have to annually renew it. I could then build a site and own my name and brand on the website, just like I used to do in more of the .com world. But things are changing. Now, for a younger person, designing for me a website on that, a lot of current graphic designers don't know how to do that on the blockchain, and it is a little complicated. So this is an example where learn how to do that in college or on your own. Do it in your own name and brand, but you could also monetize it by helping people like me that I want to pay someone to do that for me. I also own a whole bunch of other through unstoppable domains, .crypto and others, but I just don't have the time or know who the right designers are that can help me build that out.
I think that's right. I think the opportunities for young people to become creators of these new technologies and apply them for others is huge. And I mean, I've got young kids, and they get it. They are digital natives. They get that these tools are the future. They don't understand why the world isn't moving as fast as they are these days. And I think that's just something that we have to deal with. And every generation does that to the prior generation, which is it moves faster and it changes and adapts. And they get the future is arriving. The future is already here, and we just got to move faster on these things.
And for people in my age bracket that think, oh, this is not going to happen to the extent we're talking about or going to take years, the millennial and Generation Z generations are very big. I think size-wise, about as big or bigger than baby boomers. And they're coming into positions of authority as entrepreneurs, as eventually politicians, public figures, and leaders. And you're going to have to kind of bend to them. Don't think that they're going to adapt. Many of them like barely use email. To some of them, even texting is a little bit dated now. And to think that they're going to completely change is just unrealistic. You need to adapt to them to be able to move forward in the future. And again, for all the reasons that we noted, talk a little bit about some of the technological trends. We hinted at NFTs and blockchain, but there's DeFi, decentralized finance, blockchain, as we noted. A variety of things, kind of the Web3, I guess you could talk about. So if you could, I'm going to give you the floor to kind of go over a couple of what you think are going to be some of the game-changing trends that are occurring right now.
Yeah, I think the shift is moving. If you think about all we're in Web 2.0 right now, by and large, and the challenges with that are we don't own our own data. You have to do financial transactions. You have to go through alternative mechanisms. But imagine if that was now embedded into the web itself, where you could, for instance, own all your data and actually get paid for it when advertisers use it. So when Google uses your data, they're actually paying you a fee for the right to use that. And now that just becomes embedded into the web. And you can actually have one piece of data that can be enabled on a blockchain, and that Google uses it, Amazon uses that data, your healthcare insurance company uses that data, the restaurant on the corner uses that data, and you own it. And for the fact that you can decide if you want to sell your data or not. And you can actually make it your own a business out of it. That becomes embedded into the web itself, and the financial transactions actually just become something that flow seamlessly throughout the web. So you don't have to work through alternative mechanisms where it becomes, you have to get validated, you have to verify your bank accounts and all that. What if that's just automatic and seamless? And so that move towards ubiquitous computing, barrierless computing, is happening right now. And what does that look like in reality? Well, it just means that things are always on, and we already know that through our phones. But here's a very simple example that people don't even think about. Some people are on this new app called Clubhouse, which is essentially a 24/7 conference of the world, right? And means you go into this app and suddenly you can pop into rooms as if it was a virtual conference and just talk to people, engage in conversations, and have panel discussions about almost any topic on earth imaginable. That is now ubiquitous computing in forms of a conference. So what does that start doing for conferences? Now you don't have to go at a set time and a set place. You can join a conference with some of the world's leading thinkers 24/7 to talk about anything and participate and engage with some of the leading people in any sector right now. That ubiquitous model, people haven't fully grasped what that looks like yet, but all the things that we've seen now, the internet has made it ubiquitous and 24/7. Now imagine that cutting across everything, including everything that we used to think was time limited and place limited, now is moving more and more ubiquitous. So that's where the future is headed right now, and it's just going to continue.
So kind of in terms of some questions I get from people are, well, Silicon Valley. Yeah, Silicon Valley is amazing. It has Stanford as a great ecosystem. It's been a little rocked to some degree by COVID, but there's other areas in the US where you are in Kansas City and Boulder and Austin, which is exploding, New York, Boston, Miami is now becoming a tech hub, and look around the world. Silicon Valley is awesome. I love it, but it's not the end all be all. there's lots of incredible people, entrepreneurs and investors in other parts of the US and really all around the world. And now more than ever, partially due to technology, partially due to the dislocation and challenges during COVID, it's realized that we have a community globally, like you described to some degree with Clubhouse, where I don't need to get up and move to very, very expensive Silicon Valley.
Yeah, and I love the Valley. I spent a decade there of my life, and it's just one of the most exciting places to be. But what's happened in the last few years is the things the Valley has created, these tools for computing, have really opened up the doors, and you're seeing the
Yeah, that is
dispersion of the
ironic.
Valley. Yeah, and the pandemic has actually dispersed a lot of these people from the Valley out to all sorts of places, whether most famously to Texas and Miami, but it really is everywhere. You're seeing great talent emerge, and you're seeing great companies actually start to do it in many places you wouldn't expect. So, you think about Ant Financial, for instance, Alibaba's financial payments arm. They have retinal verification technology on phones throughout China and India. Where did that technology come from? It actually came from a startup built out of the University of Missouri in Kansas City, where they actually took that technology from some professors, built a company, sold it for $100 million, and now is implemented all across Asia as their eye scan financial verification technology. And that's just one little example. Like, people aren't fully appreciating how the decentralization of value creation that's been caused by the internet is actually happening right now. And you're getting great companies getting built in many places that would never have been built a decade ago. And that trend has been moving slowly now, but now we're starting to see this thing really rapidly take off. And it's just an exciting time to be looking at what Steve Case calls it the rise of the rest, which is the rise of all these other places that suddenly have access to the same types of tools and information and resources that were only previously able to be accessed in a few places, now more widely accessible to lots of people.
So in terms of like the financial trends and even tools moving forward, so decentralized tools in capital formation, crowdfunding, which almost sounds like an antiquated, old-fashioned word to use, but was a little bit of the building blocks of some of the things that we're talking about now. We just didn't have the development of certain technologies to really, and kind of when I think of crowdfunding, now I think of NFTs and DeFi, it's kind of taking it to another level. So how important are these new models and understanding them as both an entrepreneur and an investor moving forward?
They're hugely important, and to some extent, well, to a large extent, we haven't seen the full power of them. And one of the reasons has been the disconnect between the power of the tools and the policy environment. So, for instance, on crowdfunding, the SEC just a few weeks ago changed the limit on crowdfunding for being able to maximum amount of money they could raise. So companies before were limited to $1 million and being able to do public crowdfunding calls. They raised that to $5 million just a couple of weeks ago. That really opens the game now. Suddenly, on that very first day, you saw tons of companies jump in to start crowdfunding projects and broke through that $1 million barrier almost instantly. And so there was so much pent up demand. And what was the only thing that was inhibiting that demand was that the SEC rules had prohibited it from really happening. And so as the SEC, as the policy environment catches up now to what the true power of the technology is, you're going to find that open up more and more. So crowdfunding, it's not over yet. It was just the first wave. And we're starting to see these tools really start to take more and more power. And if you think about the tools of capital formation, one of the things that a lot of the people who are involved they kind of wonder, well, why are there gaps in the capital for entrepreneurs in lots of places? The Valley has seen so much money flow into entrepreneurs, but if you look at the landscape, about 3/4 of all the venture capital flows into just 3 states, California, Massachusetts, and New York. And if you look at where the money goes, only less than 1% of companies actually qualify for venture capital, in that they're the high-tech, high-growth business models that venture capital fits. And 16% of businesses qualify for banking because they have assets and they have financial track records over several years. That leaves over 83% of the businesses that haven't had the right capital mechanisms that really can support their growth. And so what we're seeing now is actually more and more tools that are emerging to help fund these other types of businesses, the other 83% out there. And that's going to be a really exciting time as new businesses, new investors try to develop new types of models to invest in businesses that have never been able to get capital before.
Yeah, there's, so much going on. And, when it comes to policy trends, so kind of a shift in the political debate from corporate worker, kind of the industrial era to, versus the individual creator. We hinted at it earlier. Other things from a regulatory perspective, simply the political environment and realignment of the redistribution of wealth versus redistribution of what it means to create wealth.
I think that's happening right now, but it's like the tectonic plates are pushing up against each other. Because if you look at the political debate in this country, we got through this election cycle last year. The debate was still largely around, well, it's the corporation versus the worker, right? Or it's the company versus the employee. And if you look at the data and you look at what people want to do, it's actually not like that anymore. The debate is actually shifting to, it's the institution versus the individual creator. That is, any individual can be an employee today. On the weekends, they could be doing a side hustle that becomes a successful business, and that person could be hiring people the next week. And that business could grow very rapidly. And I've seen this over and over again, where the thing that seems like a hobby on the side actually becomes a successful business. So the political debate hasn't fully captured that the line between a worker and an employee and an employer and a company and an independent contractor and a freelancer and a side hustler, those lines are all getting blurred. But if you look at how we still think of it from a policy side, we still have these rigid structures. We still say, well, at one point someone crosses over from being an employee where they have lots of regulatory requirements, they have healthcare, they have all these different changes, and suddenly they flip over to being an independent contractor where they're free of those regulatory constraints and they don't have access to healthcare or as easy an access to healthcare. But if you look at the real world, it really doesn't, it's not so black and white anymore. It's not so binary. It's not like one or the other. What we haven't done is fully adjust as a society to a world where everyone can be entrepreneurial. They're both worker and creator at the same time and employee at the same time. And that's going to be a shift that's going to be coming. And I think we're going to see a shift in how political parties think about themselves, about how people think of themselves in terms of what they believe in as a set of ideas for how you govern a community, how you run a city, how do you build your neighborhoods. That's all going to change because of the ways that we actually need to shift the way we're thinking about how we create value right now.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, with millennials and Generation Z, they're coming into positions of authority. They're making an influence. They'll eventually, and are now, some of them being political figures. So some of the things that we're talking about from a political landscape are obviously going to keep on trending and trending to more the digital world that we're looking at. We hinted at it earlier, and I don't want to make it too much of an overly technical dialogue, but there's things like decentralized autonomous organizations known as DAO, the Metaverse, the Web3 that we hinted at earlier. And I know this is going to be like, oh God, this is like what is Angelo talking about? But what could you do to kind of just like how these things are impacting the future for young people, for entrepreneurs, and those that want to invest in this community?
I think the thing is to apply that lens that the old models of investing, the various fixed portfolios, the portfolio theories of the past don't fully capture a lot of this value creation because the way portfolio theory has evolved, if you're running a family office or you're investing, we've tended to focus on sort of very fixed asset categories. But a lot of the things we're talking about are brand new asset classes. So what is an asset class for an alternative form of investing, for instance, whether it's a DAO where people are getting revenue streams off of businesses they've created in some kind of cohort, or what does it look like for sort of perpetual profit sharing models or revenue-based investing models? Those types of things haven't been built yet. And current portfolios for money management don't fully capture those. But if you could design new portfolios to start to benchmark and to track, like how do you know good investments and how do you benchmark them across an entire landscape of investing opportunities like that, there's a huge chance to win and get ahead of the curve on this stuff. So I think that's going to be a really exciting moment for people that are doing investing to look at what are the new types of asset categories that don't exist in the past that the new technologies are enabling. And this type of decentralized tools for value creation are really going to shift a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's taking the power away from classic kind of Wall Street and traditional institutions, and at least for the short term, because there's not a lot of data, because large companies take a long time, putting the power kind of more quote unquote in the hands of the people. And it's an interesting time for sure. It's not just Bitcoin and crypto, it's digital asset ecosystem. Many of the things we spoke about, from blockchain to NFTs to kind of the Web3 and all that that's evolving. And there's not, yeah, there's potential for asymmetrical returns. There also is potential for a lot of it, to go to nothing. How many cryptocurrencies are there out there? A lot. I'm sure many of them are going to be worth garbage, nothing. That's why there's a term that's used for some of them, although some of them do kind of, take off. So, understanding that is going to be very intriguing moving forward. I guess a question that I would ask, looking at it from an investor's lens, a family office lens, which tends to be a little older, a little more antiquated, but there's just so much noise around Bitcoin and digital asset now that they're realizing they have to get better educated and they need to have some, at least I think, allocation to it. What are ways with the things that we're talking about that would also help entrepreneurs, help America, help the world, how investors and family offices could be active? For instance, are there angel and VC funds that are investing in this that is ahead of the curve that they could become LPs in? Are there ways they could be more active direct investors? How could they be active investing in this community?
Yeah, there are actually, for instance, some of these alternative investment models. There's a whole network of revenue-based investors. A few years ago, there were none, or maybe like 3 or 4. And now there's like over 100 different funds that are getting built up using alternative revenue-based investment models, where instead of investing and waiting 10 years to get a company acquired and then getting a big hit, a big pop on the back end, they actually get a percentage of revenues of the companies because the companies are already cash flowing, but the banks can't bank them because they don't have a lot of assets. Perhaps they don't have 3 years of track record, but they're just growing quickly. And so they're able to get percentages and they start cash flowing within a few months after the investments happen. There are funds that are actually doing this right now. And they can't get allocations from Wall Street institutions because they don't fit the traditional asset categories that Wall Street thinks about. Wall Street doesn't have a benchmarking system for revenue-based investment or profit-sharing models. So a family office, though, can evaluate that on their own. They can meet fund managers, they can meet the businesses they're investing in, and get a grasp on the cash-flowing businesses that are actually expanding and growing, and how these funds are able to actually capitalize on that. And I think the other way to think about this is for these family offices is, if you look at the early waves of the internet right now, the people that made money and survived the dot-com boom were those that did the picks and shovels, right? And those were the people that actually built the infrastructure that became that lasted past the boom, and that infrastructure became really valuable. So the same thing can be applied towards blockchain tools, virtual reality, augmented reality, Web 3.0. You can actually look at what are the picks and shovels of that system that will actually perpetuate and last beyond any bubbles. And so there will be bad investments, but the picks and shovels have a chance to actually grow and grow, and look for that traction in these types of companies. The other thing I'd add is, in terms of how people can get involved, is this organization I've started called Right to Start. So Right to Start is basically a campaign to create entrepreneurial opportunity for everybody by really making it a public priority. As I mentioned before, the debate in the country has still been around, well, it's essentially, big corporations versus workers. But if you think about, what does the world need to look like? Well, we should all have the right to be an entrepreneur and to be entrepreneurial. And so the right to start is basically built off that idea that just like you've got a right to speech, you've got a right to worship, you've got a right to assemble, you have a right to start. You have a right to actually build something of value in your own life. But to do that, you've got to change the policies, change the narratives in the media, and we've got to engage civically. So it's not just waiting for Congress or the president to give permission. We can engage our cities, talk to mayors, city council people, state legislators, governors, Congress people, and even the president around how do you actually reform and lift up entrepreneurship as a priority for everybody in every community across the country. And this is an advocacy movement that we're building. And so if there's people that want to get involved, that believe in this issue, we'd love to have them join. This is something where we're actually boots on the ground in communities across the country. We've got a network of 12 communities where people actually are fighting for entrepreneurial opportunity as a fundamental right. And we'd love to have people join.
Well, then how could they learn more? How could they learn more both online and how could they connect with you?
Uh, Simple. Right2start.org is the website. So if they go to right2start.org, they can take a look at that. And there's contact information for us. And there's also information. I wrote a manifesto to launch this organization. We've been publishing and writing a lot. We've just published, I've got a monthly column in Inc. magazine where my most recent column was an interview of one of the co-founders of Moderna to talk about what
Wow.
does a post-COVID recovery landscape look like. And then I just published another column yesterday on how do states respond to this federal stimulus. There's about to be $10 billion of federal stimulus money going to states to build their capital infrastructure for entrepreneurs. The problem is the states don't know, they don't really know what to do with it yet. And so that's all going to be hashed out in the next few months. And they've got a chance to actually get engaged and make a difference. So if there's people in family offices that actually care about entrepreneurship as a broader issue, they can get engaged. This stuff is happening. This right now, we're probably looking at the most active period of entrepreneurial civic change in our lifetimes. It's happening right now. The pandemic has accelerated it rapidly. The technological trends have been building for a long time, but I think we're really at that moment now where people can get involved and get active. And I hope they'll go to Right to Start and sign up and check us out.
And for those that may want to be a direct connection, which I'm sure is on there with an email, but are you okay with giving your email out more publicly?
Sure. Victor at right2start.org. So if you email me, I'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to be able to get you involved in this work. It's really important work, and it's a real passion.
Excellent. We have about 5 more minutes left with Victor. There are a couple of questions, one or two that came in via text. I think we partially answered some of them already, but I'll maybe rephrase them a little bit. So we do have a burgeoning audience of younger people, of some of our families and others that watch us on YouTube that are like saying, yeah, like I'm graduating college soon. I went to a good college. I have a degree. It's going to be whatever in business, entrepreneurship, in finance, and in marketing. Those are probably among the big four. And I get some in psychology and philosophy. Philosophy I personally love. So kudos. Yeah, like, again, I think you got value with your education. It's what you put into it. And the value of meeting great people, building a network, becoming more independent from your parents, all those things are valuable. I do not think college is a waste of time. But I do think that some of the educational parts are a little bit antiquated and you need to take responsibility for your own learning. So I would have some concerns, and I get resumes of people in finance and marketing where it blends into the other hundreds of thousands of people that are going to be looking for a job doing that. How do you think, Victor, that people could either stand out, or more important than standing out, if they're not ready to start their own company or side hustle yet? And I think everyone should get that experience, by the way. What are things they could do to be proactive and learn about some of the new things that we're talking about so their skill set could be sharp moving forward in today's world?
Well, I'm in a similar situation in some sense. I like to think I'm not too old, although I am. It's been a few decades, but I was lucky enough to go to some very elite institutions. I went to Harvard undergrad, University of Chicago for law school. So I've been overeducated as well, and I never followed the track. I actually went off the track and did my own thing since the very beginning. But the thing that the colleges teach you, especially the people that are lucky enough to go to some of the elite colleges, is they really teach you how to think, and they teach you how to be creative and understand the world as it evolves. And that ability to abstract, to think abstractly, and to be able to put structure around very complex ideas and changes in the world will be extremely valuable. And I think that really does set people who are lucky enough to have these educations apart. Because you can see the trends and you can move towards them faster because you are lucky to have that knowledge on how to deal with it and how to manage it and how to ask the right questions. So I think to be proactive about it means diving in. I'd say one of the things about entrepreneurship is, it's the first step into the water is the coldest water. You see lots of people who say, I've always thought about starting something. 62% of Americans have a dream business they'd love to start someday. 41% of them say they'd start it within the 6 months if they could. And then in reality, less than 2% of them actually will.
Right.
And so that means there's this gap between people's entrepreneurial ambitions and what they actually end up doing. And I think if people are in a fortunate enough position to be able to do that and to do it without the same risk that a lot of people who are living hand to mouth have, the average cost of starting a business is around $30,000. and the average wealth of people is less than $30,000. And so most people can't actually do that. But if you're in a position where you can take the leap and actually try it out, by all means, try it out, because the first time isn't going to work right, and you're going to learn a ton. And maybe the one thing about entrepreneurship that isn't fully expressed is it's not that you learn a ton about business, which you will. It's not that you learn a ton about markets, which you will. It's not that you learn a ton about customers, which you will. You learn a ton about yourself because you are put into challenging situations, forced to think, forced to work on a million different fronts at the same time, and forced to be creative and find solutions that are alternatives to what you thought was a solution before. The best laid plans change immediately once you start contacting the outside world. The entrepreneurial experience is priceless like that. And anyone that has a chance to do that, you will grow so much as a human being. You'll be stretched, you will grow, you'll go through pain, you'll go through a lot of heartache, but in the end, you will become so much better, and it will prepare you for life. In fact, the research shows that people who've been entrepreneurs end up having greater lifetime earnings because they actually have grown in that process. It's not that their business made a bunch of money in the beginning. It's that the process of being an entrepreneur actually prepared them for the rest of life.
Yeah, like I think of the great philosopher Mike Tyson. And we all have a plan until we get hit, and the days of doing the business plan that's this big. And I'm not saying that's not a worthwhile exercise to think through, although I think it needs to be condensed in today's world, maybe a 10-slide PowerPoint. Yeah, pro formas and all that are very valuable, but you're going to get hit not just once, probably every day. Being an entrepreneur and having persistence. I mean, I guess there's three things you could do. You could move forward with the same plan, you could adapt, or you could quit. And there are some times when quitting is the best option relative to a bunch of factors, which we won't get into now. But usually it's going to be adapting. If you're dedicated to doing something, look at what COVID did and look at what you might have learned in college and marketing, which is valuable from a history perspective. But if you didn't couple that with what's going on in social media and knowing how to leverage from Facebook to Instagram to Twitter to YouTube to the things we spoke about on Patreon to crowdfunding to NFTs and all that's evolving. And you probably didn't learn that. So you're going to have to learn it on your own. So these are all, again, we could go on for hours and hours. You've been very generous, Victor, with your time. For those that might have missed it about 5 or 10 minutes ago, let people know again the company and the website where they could reach out to you and learn more.
Yeah, the campaign is Right to Start, and we're a campaign fighting for entrepreneurial opportunity for everyone. And we'd love to have people join. It's a advocacy movement, and we're just growing every day. It's at righttostart.org.
Great. And Victor, it's been a pleasure to have you on. And last name, by the way, is spelled Hwang. And Victor has a great background. I encourage you to learn more about Right to Start, to reach out to him. We look forward to having him on more in the future. We hope you had a chance to enjoy it. I loved it. Wish I had a little more time, but it was a lot of fun. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles, host of the Angelo Robles podcast, founder and CEO at Family Office Association. Go to our website, learn more about us and membership. It's easy, familyofficeassociation.com, and follow us on social media, Family Office Association on IG, active on LinkedIn and Twitter Family Office, and probably my most active platform on YouTube, or simply Family Office, or I guess that's our channel, if that's the word they use. Thank you all so much, our live audience, and those that are watching or hearing this in the future. We hope you enjoyed it. And again, Victor, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Angela. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.